All right, UFC Fight Night, Seattle, Cejudo versus Yadong, full card predictions. Got a bit of a cold, so mind my voice. I'll try to make this quick. Not the best card. It is in front of a crowd, so it'll probably be pretty entertaining. But, just not the best names on this card. First fight, we've got Raffael Cerqueira versus Modestas Bukauskas. This is an interesting fight. So Cerqueira came into his UFC debut as close odds with Ibo Aslan. Undefeated guy. All of his fights came by finish, or his wins rather. And then he got kind of humiliated in 50 seconds. And now he's a huge underdog versus Bukauskas, who I think Vegas probably thinks is worse than Aslan. So a little interesting. Obviously he lost his only UFC fight, but we didn't really see much of him. And then now all of a sudden he's gone from same level as Aslan to much worse than Bukauskas. And I just don't agree. I looked into his fights before the UFC. And obviously he's not the most technical striker. He's not the soundest fighter, but I do think he has the striking and the finishing ability to beat Bukauskas, who I never thought was that good. I think, you look at his record when he came back. He went on that first run in the UFC. I think he went 1-3. He lost to Khalil Roundtree, Mikhail Oleksiejczuk, and Jimmy Crute. And if I remember correctly, he beat Andreas Michailidis. Can't remember. I'm pretty sure that's true. And then he got cut and went to Cage Warriors, went on a bit of a run, came back to the UFC, and then he beat Tyson Pedro and Zach Pauga, lost to Vitor Petrino, and then beat Marcin Prachnio. And you'll notice all those names I just listed for his more recent run, not very good names. He's just not really fighting the best guys, and I think he's a little overrated just because he's 3-1 since he got cut, and a lot of people think he's improved a lot, or the UFC made a mistake cutting him. But I really don't think he was ever that good, and I don't think he's that much better than he was before. I just think he's fighting much worse opponents. Obviously, Oleksiejczuk and Jimmy Crute aren't like the best of the best at light heavyweight, but it is light heavyweight, So fighters are going to be bad, and I think they're better than Zach Pauga and Tyson Pedro and Marcin Prachnio. So because of Cerqueira's finishing ability, and how he looked on the regional scene, I'm going to pick him to win. He took his first fight against Aslan on short notice, if I remember correctly. And he might have just had the octagon jitters, first fight in the UFC in front of a crowd, and maybe that's why he lost. So I'm just going to trust that he's the better fighter. It's just his recent going hasn't been great, and Bukauskas is a little overrated, just because of his competition. Next fight of the card, we've got Nursulton Ruziboev versus Eric McConico. Kind of have a rule with Ruziboev where if he's at middleweight, I'm going to pick him, and if he's at welterweight, I'm going to pick against him. Ruziboev is 34-9-2 in his career, and I think 6 of his wins and 6 of his losses, or something like that. Or maybe it's 6 of his wins and 7 of his losses are at welterweight, and the rest of his wins and losses are at middleweight. So if that's true, what I just said, which I kind of just made up, he's 28-2 or 28-3 at middleweight and 6-7 at welterweight. This fight is at middleweight against a debuting Eric McConico, formerly light heavyweight, not the biggest guy. I mean, Ruziboev is 5 inches taller than him. He's got a 5-inch reach advantage, and he's taller than him. So, I think Ruziboev, bigger guy, fights at a lower weight class, kind of has that lighter man skill. I'm going to take out Ruziboev to do it. If you watch my previous video about Mashrabjan, whatever Ruziboev's brother's name is, you look at the Ruziboev's records, and they're a little questionable, fighting at a lot of promotions against very strange record opponents. And, whenever he fights a really bad guy, he wins in the first minute. And whenever he fights someone who's okay, he goes to a close decision. And it makes you think, like, maybe those fights are rigged. And I think that's entirely possible that Ruziboev kind of, fought in some rigged fights. Actually, after my last video, I'm not saying because of my last video, but after my last video where I talked about his brother's record, Tapal deflagged his record for suspicious activity, and they also fixed his picture being, his brother's picture before was Nursulton Ruziboev, and they fixed that. So I think a lot of people didn't look into them, and maybe that's why the records were so questionable. But even then, saying all that, I think that Ruziboev is probably the better fighter than Eric McConico. He's got a couple fights in a row, but his competition hasn't been great. 9-2-1, not the cleanest record, especially for a debutant. So I'm going to pick Ruziboev to win this. Next fight up the card, we've got Nikolay Veretennikov versus Austin Vanderford. Neither of these guys, I think, are that good. Both of them decent prospects. I think Veretennikov's a little bit better. He's looked better against better competition. Vanderford kind of got shut down by Musasi and Fabian Edwards. And those are only like really high-level guys he's fought. And then Veretennikov looked decent against Danny Barlow. Actually, arguably won that fight, but that was kind of a stinker of a fight. And then he looked pretty good against Michael Morales on the Contender Series. And we've seen both of those guys. Barlow hasn't fought since their fight, but Barlow looked good before that fight, and Morales has looked good since their fight. Vanderford's super inactive. I don't really trust him to, go on a run. So I'm going to take Veretennikov. He's got an uglier record, 12-5 versus 12-2, but I just think he's against better opponents. I think Vanderford would lose to Barlow and lose to Morales too. So if he fought both those fights, he'd be 12-4. Doesn't really mean a ton. So I'm going to take Veretennikov to win this. Just better competition. He's not the youngest guy. I think he's 35, but I think Vanderford is also 35. And also most people only know Vanderford because I'm pretty sure he's dating or married to Paige Van Zandt. So, that saying that kind of, what does that say about his judgment? I won't go too far to that. I don't know what I'm talking about. But next fight of the card, Ricky Simon versus Javid Basharat. I'm going to take Javid Basharat because he's just a pretty technical guy. He's got kind of peppermint punches. He's not going to finish Ricky Simon on the feet, I don't think. I don't know if he's going to jump a guillotine and get a submission either. But I think this fight's going to go to decision. And if it does go to decision, I think Javid Basharat is a clear winner. You look at Ricky Simon's last fight, and he got out-techniqued on the feet. He just got kind of, outsped, out-volumed by Vinicius Oliveira, and Vinicius Oliveira is by no means a technical striker. And if Vinicius Oliveira can out-technique you and out-volume you, pretty sure Javid Basharat can do it too. I think Basharat's probably got better conditioning, better technique. I don't really see Ricky Simon at this point in his career getting a finish. And then if it goes to decision, like I said, I think Basharat is just more likely to win. Next fight of the card, we've got Mansur Abdul-Malik versus Nick Klein. I'm taking Abdul-Malik, obviously. He's looked pretty solid in his last fight, in the UFC. And he's got a lot of momentum, got a, quick knockout. Nick Klein, obviously not the best prospect, 6-1 versus 7-0. But I don't think Nick Klein is that bad of an underdog. He's plus 800. Mansur Abdul-Malik, he's got to finish in all of his fights. He's, 7-0, all finishes. But didn't look that good on the Contender Series. He got the finish. And Nick Klein, pretty decent prospect. I don't know why he's a plus 800 underdog. So I think that's good money for him. I'm not going to take the bet, but I think Abdul-Malik will probably win. But I also think that Abdul-Malik will get fraud jacked before, he enters the top 15. I'm pretty sure it's at middleweight. Let me double check. It's not at light heavyweight. Yeah, it's at middleweight. I just think that Abdul-Malik's gonna win. And I think that like I said, probably be fraud checked by the time he gets to the top 15. But I don't know if Nick Klein is going to be that guy. I did say that about Peyton Talbot and his last fight, and then he did get fraud checked in that fight. So maybe Nick Klein, big underdog, might do it too. Probably not. Next fight of the card, we've got Melquizael Costa versus Andre Fili. I think Costa's looked like he's improved a bunch in his recent few fights, especially his last one. I think he took a pretty big jump up between his last loss and his last fight. I don't really think Andre Fili has looked that good recently. Close fights with not the best fighters. He had a close fight with Cub Swanson, who obviously has looked decent in his past couple, but should have lost to Hakeem Dawodu. A win over Billy Quarantillo isn't the craziest win ever. Andre Fili also had a close fight with Bill Algeo. Not exactly what you want. Bill Algeo just retired, coming off a couple losses. Not the best performances recently. So yeah, and then he also had some not so great performances against the actual good fighters he's fought. Got knocked out by Dan Ige, got outclassed by Nathaniel Wood, and honestly, I like Nathaniel Wood a lot, but I think he's a little overrated. I don't know if he's the best. That Naimov fight is aging kind of poorly. So yeah, I think Costa's just got more momentum, younger guy, improved more since his last fight. I think both of their recent performances have looked about equal, and Costa's probably improved more, if anyone. I think if anything, Fili's maybe regressed a little bit since his prime. So also Andre Fili is on I think it's a 6-fight win 1 lose 1 streak, and he won his last fight. So pattern says he's going to lose the next fight, and he also hasn't won twice in a row since 2019. So yeah, if you're a patterns guy, the patterns also say Fili is going to lose. Next fight of the card. This one was hard for me to pick. You've got Jan Cutelaba versus Ibo Aslan. Like I was saying before, I don't really know how much to talk about Ibo Aslan before, but this close fight was, or not a close fight. It was a close odds with Cerqueira, knocked him out in a minute. I've not really know what to think of Ibo Aslan. Came to the UFC 13-1, only lost to Anton Turkalj, beat Anton Turkalj or Turkalj in his debut. I don't actually know how to pronounce it. I feel like every other fight it changes. But losing to Anton Turkalj in any point in your career is not a very good thing, and then not having the cleanest performance against him is another thing. It's just like not a good sign. I actually tweeted after his first fight, I'm never picking Ibo Aslan again. But I think his biggest hole is his speed. He's just not a very quick light heavyweight. And Jan Cutelaba is not necessarily the heavyweight that's going to take advantage of that. He's not the fastest himself. He's not going to have a big advantage in those inside boxing exchanges. He's not going to out left hook him if they both throw a left hook at the same time. Jan Cutelaba also got out grappled by Johnny Walker. Not a good look. He got submitted by Johnny Walker, and I don't think he's going to use that grappling that got him submitted by Johnny Walker to grind out Ibo Aslan. He could. We haven't really seen much of Ibo Aslan's grappling in the UFC, but I don't think Cutelaba is that guy. It's kind of my point. Jan Cutelaba also got outstruck at distance by Felipe Lins, which is how Ibo Aslan was kind of fighting against Turkalj in their first fight. So if he goes that way again, I think he has the advantage there. Yeah. I mean, Aslan doesn't have the best gas tank, and maybe Cutelaba can just, have a close first couple rounds, win a third round, or maybe get a finish late in the third round. But I really don't think he's that guy anymore. That's just not been his style. Really close fights. Cutelaba has become really close, boring fights, or he gets smoked. And I think this is going to be the latter. Interesting enough, Jan Cutelaba in his last fight at UFC Paris won against a debuting Ivan Arslan, which I don't know Turkish, I don't know Russian or whatever Arslan is, or I think he's Croatian or Slovenian or something like that. But Ibo Aslan and Ivan Arslan have to mean the same thing when you translate it into the same language, right? Like both of them have to be like Igor Aslan. I gotta imagine that's what it means. So I don't know, maybe Jan Cutelaba is gonna be 2-0 against Ibo Aslan, Ivan Arslan, or maybe I'm just talking shit. But honestly, Ivan Arslan could have won that fight, so it doesn't even mean that much if you do believe in bullshit like that. So I'm taking Ibo Aslan to win. I really don't want him to win. I called out when he debuted, like, this guy's kind of shit. And now, you've got the UFC Instagram and Twitter talking about how Ibo Aslan undefeated in the UFC, no, unavenged losses, huge winning streak. It's like he's clearly dog shit. And I know Turkish fans don't have the most UFC representation, and they like their guy, but he's not very good. So I kind of hope he loses, but whatever. Next fight at the card. Alonzo Menifield versus Julius Walker. I don't really know what to make of this fight. I'll be honest, I've never watched Julius Walker fight ever, but I looked at his resume. Last fight, 20-11 guy. He beat a guy who's 7-5, beat a guy who's 6-1, beat a guy who's 0-3, 3-5, 0-1. Not a very clean record. I just think there's a very good chance he's not UFC level. 6-0 against 6 bums. doesn't really mean a ton. Kind of, a lot of fighters who are not UFC level can do that. And Menifield, 15-5-1, not as clean of a record, but most of those fights have been in the UFC. And he's beaten some decent guys. He beat Dustin Jacoby and Jimmy Crute. And nothing we know about Julius Walker will say he's anywhere near the level. So, should be noted, Alonzo Menifield is mentally retarded, so he could just walk into a 1-2 and get knocked out. And Julius Walker is a massive light heavyweight. He's like 6'5" with an 81-inch reach. And he's also much younger than Alonzo Menifield. So I think there's definitely potential for Julius Walker to be a great fighter in the future. But I don't know, how am I supposed to know if he is? He's never fought anyone good. So I'm going to take Alonzo Menifield. We just know more about him. We know he's at least as good as he is. He did have one of the worst performances ever against Carlos Ulberg. He got knocked out in like 12 seconds because he just sprinted into a right hand. But he's fine. We know at least he's fine. And we know that Julius Walker could be horrible. So, yeah. Next fight of the card, Gene Silva versus Melsik Baghdasaryan. Melsik Baghdasaryan, not bad, but I think his resume is a little overrated. Maybe not overrated, but definitely hasn't aged very well. He beat Tucker Lutz, who, not the best fighter in the world. Beat Bruno Souza, which at the time looked like a decent win. Bruno Souza is now 0-2 in the UFC. He's been cut. Similar story for Colin Anglin, another one of his wins. Ended up 0-2 in the UFC, got cut. At the time of their fight, he was 8-1. Now he's 10-6. He's gone 2-5 since their fight. He beat Dennis Bazooka, which Dennis Bazooka is still in the UFC. He's still a pretty solid fighter, but this was when Dennis Bazooka was 4-1 on the Contender Series. I could be wrong. I think he took that fight on short notice. It took Dennis Bazooka another 3 years and another 6 fights before he got signed to the UFC. So, Bazooka, decent win. An 8-1 guy, a 10-1 guy, decent looking wins, and then you look deeper and it's like, they're not the best. And Gene Silva is on fire right now. His whole, team, if you ignore Kanan Kraszewski and whatever the girl on his team is, they're 16-0 in the UFC or something crazy. You've got Carlos Prates and Mauricio Huffy and or Rufio, however you pronounce that, and whatever the other guy's name is, I can't. Caio Baralho. So these guys got a ton of momentum. They've all looked good in their recent fights. I think Gene Silva is actually pretty legit. I wasn't a believer. I thought he was a bit of a brawler or a scrapper after his Contender Series fight against Kevin Vallejos. But since then, beat Jude Ober at lightweight, short notice. That's a really good win. Knocked out Charles Jourdain really impressively. He knocked out Charles Jourdain in a way that made me say, why doesn't everyone do this to Charles Jourdain? So I've been really impressed by him recently. I think he's much more proven than Melsik Baghdasaryan, and I'm going to take him to win this fight. 14-2 versus 8-2, by the way. So he's got the better record against, I don't want to say better competition, but he's got better results against better competition, in my opinion. Next fight of the card, Gene Matsumoto versus Rob Font. This is a short notice fight. Originally, it was supposed to be Dominic Cruz versus Rob Font, but Dominic Cruz stepped out and retired. So now we got Gene Matsumoto. Now, I think Gene Matsumoto is pretty solid. He's undefeated, 16-0. He looked really good in his debut against Dan Argueta. But when he took that step up in competition from Dan Argueta to Brad Katona, he kind of regressed pretty significantly in his performance. Looked good against Dan Argueta, looked mediocre against Brad Katona, arguably lost that fight. So, I don't really think that he's going to beat Rob Font. I think Rob Font is another huge step up. And if he takes a similar step back in performance, he's going to clearly lose. If you look at Rob Font's last fight, made Kyler Phillips gas out by just using his takedown defense and preventing the grappling and neutralizing the grappling. And that's Matsumoto's game. He's a grappler. If he can neutralize the grappling, I think he has a huge advantage on the feet. And he was preparing for Dominic Cruz, which is a fighter where you want to neutralize the grappling and take advantage of your advantages on the feet. I think Rob Font has the skill advantage, the matchup advantage. Historically, Rob Font is really good at preventing prospects from breaking into the top area of bantamweight. He did it to Adrian Yanez. He did it to Kyler Phillips in his last fight. I'm pretty sure he did it to Sergio Pettis. So really good against prospects. And again, Matsumoto is taking this fight on short notice. Surprisingly, he's the favorite. Maybe Vegas knows something we don't. I don't know. Odds are kind of close. I think they moved a bit. So I'm gonna take Font to do this. I just think he's got a good matchup, and he's looked more impressive against better competition. So next fight of the card, co-main event: Anthony Hernandez versus Brendan Allen. This is a rematch of their fight for the title in LFA from 2018, I believe it was. And if you look at the two skill levels, I think Hernandez has improved more. So therefore, I'm picking to win. And here's why. I think, for one, is when we just want to look at resumes, I think that Allen has gotten pretty greatly overrated because he had a really long win streak. But if you look at the quality of the opponents on the win streak, and by the way, this is every single opponent has a win streak, which is, 7-8 fights. Sam Alvey, bum. Jacob Malkoun, bum. Christoph Joko, washed, bum. Andre Muniz, bum. Who did beat, by the way, Anthony Hernandez, but we'll get to that in a second. Burnley Silva, bum. Paul Craig, bum. Chris Curtis, decent fighter, split decision. Arguably should have lost that fight. Not a very good, matchup. Not a really good, stylistic showing for a fighter like Anthony Hernandez. So that's the breakdown of their resumes and how they match up. But as far as the actual matchup, as their skills go and their styles go, I think the key to beating Anthony Hernandez, as shown by Kevin Holland and almost Michel Pereira, is to hurt him early. And he's kind of soft to the body, and he kind of likes to, I don't want to say quit, but he did quit against Kevin Holland after he got hurt. Just hurt him early. Make sure he can't get the grappling off before we can get those takedowns off and, chain wrestle you and find your back or find a submission. Hurt him. Because, he's willing to get hurt. You saw Kevin Holland do that and get the stoppage, and you saw Michel Pereira do that and almost get the stoppage in his last fight. And I just don't think Allen is capable of doing that. He rarely hurts anyone on the feet. Most of his finishes early are by submission. Most of the finishes, period, are by submission. And if he's going to, do any damage to anyone early, it's going to be on the ground. And I just don't think he can do that against a guy like Anthony Hernandez. He only has one TKO in the UFC, and it was at the end of round 1, and it was against a bum, Tom Breese, or something Breese, whatever his name is. And Brendan Allen also couldn't finish Paul Craig on the feet. Paul Craig has no head movement, has not a very good chin, and he wasn't able to find his chin on the feet. I don't think he's going to do that to Anthony Hernandez if he can't do it to Paul Craig. I think, just in general, grapplers can also be beat by just neutralizing the grappling, gassing them out, winning the end of the fight or getting a late finish, and just taking advantage of the fact that they have a high energy cost to their style, and they can be broken. And I don't really think Allen's going to be able to do that, because if you look at his last fight, that's what happened to him. He was looking really good in the first round against Imavov, and then he gassed out and lost the last 2 rounds and lost a decision. I think if anyone's going to do that, and make the other guy gas and submit him, make the other grappler gas and submit him, it's going to be Hernandez, because that's exactly how he won against Rodolfo Vieira, who was undefeated at the time, ADCC champion. I think Anthony Hernandez winning by submission was like plus 1,800, or maybe winning by submission round 2 was plus 1,800 or something like that. But Anthony Hernandez, made him shoot, made him fail, and then got a submission in the second round. After Vieira gassed out. And if Brendan Allen does the same thing he did against Imavov, try to win in the grappling, gas out, I really think that Hernandez is going to be able to get a submission. Now, I also think this fight should have been 5 rounds, because it's dumb to have a rematch that's 3 rounds after a 5-round first fight. But I'm going to go with Hernandez in this one, finding the submission late or winning rounds 2 and 3. For the main event, we've got Henry Cejudo versus Song Yadong. Hard to make anything of this fight, saying Cejudo, took a kind of a long break from the UFC after his fight against Dominic Cruz, vacated the belt, and then thought he could win against Aldra, so he came back, lost that fight, and then lost to Merab. So, this is what I have to say about it. Okay, I wrote that Song Yadong historically has done well against fighters he has a size advantage against. You look at his fights against Jan. I'll start with this. Ricky Simon, Marlon Moraes, Julio Arce, and Alejandro Perez. He won all those fights, had a size advantage. Was the bigger guy, used his size to win the fights. And then against Jan, he was the bigger fighter, and Didn't win that fight, but he did a lot better than a lot of people thought he would. Obviously, Peter Yan, really good fighter, really technical fighter. And Song Yadong, I think on some people's scorecards, won 2 of the 3 rounds. It looked pretty good. Not a lot of people like to look good in close fights against Peter Yan. So, those are the fights that Song Yadong has a size advantage in. And he will have the greatest size advantage in his UFC career against Henry Cejudo. So, there's that. Henry Cejudo has been 0-2 in his return to the UFC, like I said before. Lost to Aljo, lost to Merab. Henry Cejudo hasn't won a fight since Tony Ferguson lost to Justin Gaethje. So much like Tony Ferguson, Henry Cejudo hasn't won since Tony Ferguson lost his first fight of his streak. So if you think about how much Tony Ferguson has regressed at a similar age to Henry Cejudo in that amount of time, what does that say about Cejudo? And although Cejudo has only fought top competition since he's been back, he got what I think are arguably the 2 best matchups for him at the top of bantamweight. Aljo and Rob are both grapplers, and just think about what the odds would be for if Cejudo came back to fight Yan. I feel like he'd be a pretty big underdog. If he came back to fight Umar, he'd be a pretty big underdog, or O'Malley, or any of those really technical strikers like Sandhagen. And he's 0-2, and or rather, he's 0-2 against really good fighters. But I think if he was going to beat anyone at the top of bantamweight, it was going to be those 2. So I don't really think it's fair to say like it's 0-2 whatever it was against really good fighters. It's like those were the best matchups for him. So I think he would have been 0-2 against much of the top of bantamweight. I think if you put Cejudo against Yan, he wouldn't have looked as good as Song Yadong did. If you put, Cejudo against, not Ricky Simon, but Corey Sandhagen, I don't think he would have looked as good as, or made that fight as close as it was, for as long as that fight lasted, obviously. Obviously, that fight went to Dr. Stoppage, which brings me to this. I'm going to pick Song Yadong, but if there's any fight to pick a draw, this is one. Because I think there's a very good chance this fight has a point taken, or a draw, or a DQ. Both of these guys are, obviously Song Yadong, I was talking about how he's got a size advantage, but he's not the tallest fighter at bantamweight. He's 5'8". Henry Cejudo's 5'4". Both of these guys like to lead you with their head. They're both, Cejudo especially, he likes to, get those karate headbutts in. And I think this fight has a very good chance of just having a ton of headbutts, which, obviously you can see a draw or a DQ or a no contest from headbutts. Or point taken. And I also think this fight is very, likely to have a doctor stoppage. You saw the doctor stoppage against Corey Sandhagen. Song Yadong, very narrow eyes. That's just how it is. I don't know if that's problematic to say, but he very narrow eyes, and that's lends well to getting fights stopped by the doctor. He's also got scar tissue on his eyes now because of that Corey Sandhagen fight, and with headbutts, I think there's a pretty good chance a cut gets open around his eye. So if there were ever a fight to pick for a draw, it would be this one. I was kind of tempted to do it because if this is a draw, that'd be like the greatest pick ever. But I'll pick Song Yadong. He's a pretty big favorite for a reason. I just think he's more active. Looks better recently. Obviously he lost to Yan and he lost to Sandhagen, but those are 2 really good fighters. And it's hard to take it's hard to be like, wow, he lost to Sandhagen, he lost to Yan. It's hard to take anything away from him from those performances, especially the Sandhagen one. I'll say actually, especially the Yan one too. I mean, he made that fight close. He had a doctor stoppage against Sandhagen. That fight could have gone his way if he kept going. He just looked good against the top bantamweight for as long as Cejudo's been out of the game. Even though he's a far younger fighter and he's never retired and then came back, he's got, he's 21-8-1. That's 30 fights, and Cejudo has 20. So he's got 10 more fights than Cejudo, even though he's much younger. Got more experience than MMA. Obviously, Cejudo has the experience in wrestling, probably has 200 matches, but really 2,000 if he started really young. But in MMA, Yadong has more experience, looks better recently at the top of the the division, looks like the better fighter. So those are my picks for UFC Seattle. While we're here, because tomorrow is also a massive boxing event, I'll give my pick for the main event of that. On my Tapology, I did pick the a couple of the fights that I cared about, but obviously the Dubois fight fell through, so I don't care about most of that card now. But for the main event, last time I picked Bivol over Beterbiev, and this time I'm picking Bivol against Beterbiev again. I think he got robbed in the last fight. Honestly, I had it 9-3, 8-4 for Bivol. I just think that Beterbiev was landing a lot of punches on the gloves, and Bivol would land 2 or 3 good strikes. Or I think he landed in about 8 of the rounds. He landed 2 or 3 good strikes every time Beterbiev landed 1. And I just think that his style is harder for Beterbiev to adapt to going forward. And I also think that he should have won the first one. He's also more likely to get a finish. I just think his style lends better to finishes, especially when you consider that Beterbiev is landing all of his good punches on the guard of Bivol. So if anyone's going to get a finish, it'll be Bivol. There's 12 more rounds to get a finish. If anyone improve more, it's Bivol. I mean, you just watched my last video, or my video on 312 about Strickland Duplessis, and I'm saying the same things because I believe similar matchup. Obviously, it's not a similar matchup at all. These guys are technical strikers, and Strickland Duplessis aren't. But yeah, those are my picks. Let me know if you agree or disagree. That's all. Like the video, share the video, comment on the video, subscribe, follow me on Twitter. Links in the description. That is all. Thank you for listening.